Hey everyone, welcome to Be the Change. My name is Lily Mott, and today's episode is a very special one about how change comes when you love your whole self. This week's episode features a great guest and a very exciting announcement. Hannah Whitfield is a neurodivergent creative activist, and she is also the newest member of Be the Change Media Network. Hannah is going to be talking about her podcast launching on Be the Change Media Network tomorrow, December 5th, and all of the other work she's doing. So I don't want to spoil too much, so let's go ahead and get started with this episode featuring Hannah Whitfield.
Hello, so I'm Hannah. I'm a neurodivergent creative activist, if I was going to put a label on it. I'm someone who loves to do so many different things. It's hard to put a label on it. But I'm very lucky that I get to combine both of my two big passions, which is creativity and social change and activism. I am an actor, artist, dancer, musician, facilitator, just anything creative. And I'm currently doing a degree in inclusive performance. I'm autistic, ADHD with a pathological demand avoidance profile, and just love all things creative, really.
Thank you so much for sharing that intro, Hannah, and welcome to Be the Change podcast. You are really bringing the energy, which I love and I appreciate it. So, you have an amazing story, and I know this because I've heard you tell it, but I would love for you to share your story if you feel comfortable. Can you tell me about your experiences and about the journey that led you to want to become an activist and get started with this work?
Okie dokie. So I kind of got into activism in 2020, and the reason I fell into it, and I think it's interesting because this week, when we're recording this, is actually I Will Week, and I've just been in a talk with someone who about campaigning, and they were saying that they didn't even realize they were a campaigner until like after they were already a campaigner. And I would say exactly the same for my activism journey. I never viewed myself as an activist. I never thought that's what I was doing. It was almost, I fell upon it. And then it was kind of afterwards that I realized that that was what it was called. I think, and it's the reason I'm probably so passionate about it is kind of the things that I've been through in my life. Like my path so far has been, a bit of a challenging one. We all have our difficulties. I grew up undiagnosed neurodivergent, so I didn't know I was autistic and ADHD. And therefore, I kind of grew up thinking I was really broken, thinking that I was stupid, thinking that, everyone else had this rule book to life that I wasn't given. And the kind of quote, I'm not a broken horse, I'm just a zebra. And I think it's like quite a little fun quote. So yeah, as I grew up, kind of really struggled with kind of just every aspect of life, but being assigned female at birth, the way that I presented meant that it stayed quite undercover. I also had a bereavement of someone really close to me when I was young, and I also suffered with childhood abuse. So I think all of those things kind of compiled together. Plus being an absolute academic perfectionist and wanting kind of my way of controlling the uncontrollable nature of my life was to be incredibly hard on myself. And at 9 years old, I actually developed an eating disorder and had started having suicidal thoughts. I wrote a letter to my mum at 9 years old, wanting to end my life. And I think that kind of is something that I now look back on and like, obviously it was a horrible experience and like is why I'm so passionate about making change, because no 9-year-old, no one of any age should be feeling that, but especially not, children that young. And then at 15 was when it all went very, very wrong. I ended up having to drop out of school. I was under mental health services for a long time. And then I was spent 5 years in and out of inpatient hospital. And during that time, I sadly then experienced more abuse by the people who were there, who were meant to look after me and care for me. And I think the perspective, how that changed your perspective on the world and like the trust issues that you develop. And since then, I've been diagnosed with complex PTSD, which is something that, although has been really hard and has to begin with, kind of you have to go through the stages of like grief almost when it comes to trauma, knowing that the reason why I am the way I am is because of the things that have happened, and that's not that they define me, but like it explains why my reactions are, because my body is stuck in that kind of survival mode, and it's really kind of knowing that is allowing me to make steps to make change. So But before I only found that out actually this year. It's crazy how like slowly but surely the little pieces have been put together. But in 2020, I actually got a job as a teaching and learning assistant. And at this time, I was still kind of struggling with my mental health, still in and out of hospital. And I do have to give a lot of credit to my kind of recovery and like that finding a purpose in a world that I thought was so evil and horrendous, to the little child who I worked with, who is an absolute legend. Knows nothing of the impact that they've already made. A massive change maker in their own right. And at the same time, I also joined Mind on their Youth Voice Advisory panel for their new strategy. And it was like, here, I got the bug. And again, at the time, I didn't realize I was still struggling because I'm still in and out of hospital. And now looking back, I can see that luckily now I would say that I have other reasons to live. It's not my only reason, but I think I viewed the world as so evil and so horrible. I couldn't comprehend all of like the suffering that was going on, and I couldn't imagine myself being in a place like that. And it was kind of what I decided was, if I'm going to have to stay, it's quite deep and morbid, but then I will want to be a part of making a change, and that's the only way I can stay. And obviously, kind of that was my initial grasp, and then I've since got into a much better place. But yeah, that was kind of the start, and then it's just grown from there. And since then, I've worked with over 25 organizations and created my own little thing. So it's quite exciting.
That is amazing. And thank you so much for sharing. I'm so grateful that you are so open and so willing to tell your story, because I think it's such an impactful one for people to hear. So I would love to kind of build upon one of the topics that you talked about. Can you tell me about how your music and your art and all of the creative work that you're doing ties into your activism? I'd love to know more about your experience as a creative artist, as you mentioned in your intro.
Yeah, definitely. So I think I've always loved performing, and I like the performing arts, but growing up, obviously, because I was undiagnosed, I was incredibly anxious. Like I had separation anxiety when I was little. Like I couldn't even go to school by myself. My mum had to come with me to school. I was like the most anxious child. So I never went to any club. My mum did try like to begin with, and I would just cry and scream and hold on to her. And because I couldn't even go to school by myself, I think she was a bit like, right, I think we need to stop this. And I did do panto when I was younger in my local town for a bit, but during like when I was in hospital, anyone who's been in a hospital for a very long time, especially psychiatric hospital, there is not much to do. And I think definitely in CAMS, so like the children's services, there's a lot of arts and craft. And like that's when I started bullet journaling, and I've always loved the idea of being creative. But growing up, I believed, because of I guess like that the societal pressure that's put onto you and the way our academic system is that looks like academia. Success looks like having 12 GCSEs, all at A star, and then going on to getting 4 A levels, and then going on to a red brick university. And if you don't do that, you're not successful and you're not deemed as intelligent. And I was very much trapped within that. And I think it took being completely at rock bottom. And obviously, there were definitely better ways of coming to that realization that academics is not the be all and end all. I think I held on to academics because it was a way to show other people that I was like I was worth something when I had no self-worth myself. But I think having to drop out of school, which was my like biggest fear ever, and because I'd kind of lost everything, I was then kind of just using creativity in little ways during being in hospital, and slowly but surely kind of doing more and more. And then I've actually had some quite negative experiences in terms of trying to kind of get into the creative industries, being told I'm too autistic or having a lot of discrimination and ableism. And I think it was at that point that I kind of was even more, or I was already very passionate about making change, but it was even more so. And for me, as someone with like did have very bad social anxiety, I'm much better now, but also being autistic and like not liking sensory overload, the thought of joining a protest or like was just like no, and I think I definitely very much had this idea again, like just like with academics, the activism was this one thing, like I needed to go and chain myself to the M25, and obviously actually, safety first, think about what you're doing. And then, but it felt like, oh, I can't get involved in that. But then it was like the slow realization actually that activism isn't a one size fits all, just like intelligence isn't. And actually the thing that I love the most, my way of communicating, the thing that gave me my voice after being silenced for so long was creativity. It is the language I speak. And I wrote a blog for the Mighty Creatives, which is one of the charities I'm on the youth board for, which was kind of called Creativity Saved My Life, how creativity helped me find my voice. And I think my confidence and my, like, it's amazing. Like, I think, you know, I only really, like, my mum knows the girl who used to be, and, like, you know, someone who now, you know, sits and does these things would never, I would never have done any of those things. And I do like having creativity and finding a way to express myself, a way to communicate, and also as a form of escapism. And then it was that realization that actually, like, this is a really powerful tool for change. And not only did I kind of seen a bit of like theatre and kind of like using theatre for activism, and then kind of realizing that actually any form of creativity, and it's just now like I'm a bit obsessive because it's just like I like to try everything. So I do go the whole hog of like music, dance, singing, acting, musical instruments, and like visual arts and like drawing, bullet journals. But I think it's a different way of doing it, and I think it's such a powerful way. And firstly, like, I started it for myself. It was just a way of me finding my identity, and that was a big thing that I needed to like go through, was kind of realizing who I was, and kind of knowing now that I have complex PTSD, and kind of that's happened my whole life, that I wasn't going back to someone from before. I was creating a whole new person from the beginning who had no idea what was going on. And that, for me, creativity has been just such a amazing tool, and it's just so powerful.
I think that is so interesting, and you actually created the perfect segue into this next topic that I want to talk about, your podcast, which is coming to Be the Change Media Network. So over the past couple months that we've been working together, you definitely strike me as someone who chooses to do something and then just get started with it. And I think that relaunching your podcast and then, of course, putting it on Be the Change Media Network is a great example of how I think you just really get started with things and you make them happen. So that being said, why did you choose to get started with your podcast originally? And why did you choose to relaunch it? Give me a little history of the podcast.
So I think it's interesting that thing that you just said about, you know, just getting started. And I have a quote that, again, at the time, you know, I know if I was listening to myself now as the, you know, 17-year-old on the psych ward, I would have been like, she's an idiot. But it truly is true. And like the quote of, you know, one step starts a journey of miles. And I think it felt so big. This whole idea of life. I mean, for me, turning 18 was my biggest fear. I was terrified of turning 18. And I spent the whole year before I turned 18 in hospital because I was so desperate not to turn 18. And I think that idea that it really can be something so small, and like at the time you don't even realize that this is the beginning. And I do hope that definitely through like sharing my journey and my story to prove that it is possible, and you can go through rubbish and you cannot believe, but it is all there within you, and you don't have to make massive steps straight away. It can be tiny little steps. And I think how the podcast came about actually started ironically, and of course it did because it was called Legally Detained. It started while I was sectioned under the Mental Health Act in a PQ, and I'd kind of had this idea of creating, like, sharing stories. People would always I think I've always been a storyteller, I guess. I think that's kind of the natural, like, creative element of my life. And I was like talking to this other patient on the ward, and I was like, oh, I just would really love to, like, I don't even know, to be fair, we were both quite poorly at the time, want to create like a blog or something. People had kind of mentioned it to me, and she was like, yeah, go for it. I mean, and then I was like, oh, but the only name I can think of is Legally Detained. Like, and I was like, I kind of love it, but I also think, is that too feral even for me, like, to go around calling? But because at this time, like, I wasn't, you know, I was someone with literally no friends. Like, I was just like the shyest, quietest. I had no friends. I just had my mum, like my sibling, my dog. Like, it was only family that it was just I had such a tiny little world. And the thought of like being online in any presence was like, I'd kind of had experience with like the mental health community within social media, but it wasn't in a healthy or like helpful way. So the idea of kind of was really terrifying. And especially then going by a name like legally detained, that felt like, is that too, like, is that inappropriate? Is that too far? My fellow patient was like, absolutely, that's the best name ever. And then actually a year later, I can't remember exactly when from the journey, but I did start Legally Detained, my blog. And with that kind of, I actually shut down my original Instagram that I had, like, was kind of tied to very like negative experiences, and I kind of just had my blog. And again, like, it was just a very, very random, I'm not even sure if anyone even read what I was saying. And then kind of through then I started doing more with the charities, kind of more and more charity work. And then I had a few different Instagrams, but I wasn't really sure. And then it kind of put it into like being a portfolio and being like my activism. And then I changed to a different blog site because websites are really confusing, and I've never, like, it was not something you ever taught in school, how to like do these kind of things. And then about I think a year and a half ago, I had like a branding, I got gifted like a branding marketing like hour, and it was really good. And they were saying like, well, where do you want like your career and things to go? And I was like, I want to do more public speaking. And they were like, well, having a blog is great, but it's not showing your ability to speak. Have you ever thought about doing a podcast? And it was something that I'd like always thought about, but I was like, I can't start a podcast. I'm just some randomer from like up north, like near Sheffield. Like, I can't just start a podcast. Like, that was just not what happens. And then it was actually the confidence from my friend who does part of the podcast with me. Kind of, we were joking about starting a podcast when I went and started my course last year, which again was like a massive step, having not been in education for a long time, and then kind of just went for it. It was a bit of a crazy experience. And kind of in the past like 6 months, obviously we've had a little break, but it's kind of growing, and hopefully like I'm in the process of updating my website, which is going to have my blog on, but also like my creative portfolio. And yeah, I feel like it's quite a nice metaphor from the person who created the original blog while she was, under a section in the Mental Health Act, under the Mental Health Act in the mental health hospital, and going to no longer legally detained, the podcast, after I've made it out the other side.
I love that, and I think that this is all just such an amazing full circle, and I'm so excited to be a small part of all of this as well. So, can you tell me a little bit more about No Longer Legally Detained? When is the podcast coming? What are some of the topics that you're going to be talking about? Give me a little promo.
Yes, so I started No Longer Legally Detained back earlier on this year, and kind of the premise of the podcast was life after the psych ward. How do you navigate being an adult when you never expected to be one? And I think it came from that experience that I had myself. Obviously, for a very long time, I didn't want to get any better. Not because I didn't necessarily think there was anything wrong with me. I just thought everything was just too bad. And then when I kind of was thinking, well, maybe there is a chance of a life, I was like, I have no idea what's going on. Having been like suffered like with, being institutionalized, missing out on those kind of milestones in the terms of just having absolutely no idea where to start. Like, you get kind of let out of these places, and once your symptoms have been managed, like, which is what a lot of the services do, there isn't anything of like, how do you like get back into real life? And I think that's something that it was just so alien. And I kind of wanted to, once I'd kind of gone through that, I kind of realized that, oh, that was something that I really struggled with. And maybe that's something that other people struggle with. And kind of the idea that I know a lot of people, and myself included, we get stuck in this revolving door cycle patient kind of thing, because there is nothing out there for us. Because when we get out, even if we really, really, really want it, it's such a confusing and complicated world to live in, and you don't have the support that you'd have had when you were younger, because now everyone else your age doesn't need those same things. And I think that was kind of where the premise started. And at the time, I was at drama school with my friend, so we kind of were having like a drama school kind of episode, and then mine was like more of that narrative. But we had a bit of a break because it's very important to look after ourselves when we're doing anything like this, and kind of really finalizing exactly like what we want in this next stage. So going forward in this next stage, there is still going to be the 2 episodes a week under the main umbrella of the podcast. And kind of, so on the main part of the podcast is still the life after the psych ward, how do you navigate being an adult when you never expected to be one, with my Thursday thoughts. And it's going to be, each episode is going to be kind of navigating and then a topic, and just me talking about my experiences, tips and tricks that I've got along the way. I'm hoping as we go forward, I'm going to get some guests on, because I think it's so important that, like, although this is my experience, I'm only one person, and what works for me because of all of the circumstances that come around who I am as a person. And I think it's so important to have different voices, but also it's inspiring to hear how other people do things. And that's kind of where we're going a bit with the Monday Mornings with Millie episodes. It was originally very drama school based, but what we kind of realized is that although the overarching podcast came from my idea of like life after the psych ward, like what is this adulthood thing, actually you don't have to have been in a psych ward to no idea how to adult. So kind of changing a bit of that narrative onto just every day, and kind of having the two of us from different life experiences, but also showing the similarities and differences. And actually the adulthood is just really hard, and like it's just a lot. And actually just kind of chatting like friends do when we have those deep chats. And I hope that the idea is just to be kind of, just to be a voice out there, just to be an experience. I think it's important. There are already lots of voices out there, but everybody's experience is so unique and different. And I think you can just click with somebody and on somebody's experiences. And I think what I like about ours is that we do bring very different kind of extremes of life into one, especially with the Monday Mornings episodes. But I think there are so many similarities, and I think that is really important and powerful for us all to kind of see our differences, but also see our similarities. And then, yeah, hopefully just see where it goes. I'm very much like, I really like to plan, but I also have to like freestyle a little bit. But there's definitely going to be some kind of episodes. We're hoping, I'm fingers crossed, this is me in my launching in the beginning of December, with a bit of like the background to like Legally Detained is going to be one of the first kind of episodes. But we're going to get in some navigating Christmas as someone who is it's quite a tricky time of year, especially for those people with like eating disorders or the kind of trauma, mental health. I can't even remember what me and Millie we have actually pre-filmed, so you're gonna have to ask her first, because I have no idea what we filmed. People pleasing was definitely one of the ones that Millie wanted to do, because me and her have very, very opposite experiences of people pleasing. So that's going to be, there's a lot of things that we're so close, but yet we have some very, very differing like experiences, which I think is really fun to kind of hear. And yeah, just hopefully kind of this idea of just navigating different things, and it not being like, you know, not a doctor, not a scientist, got no of that, but it's actually just like how I've navigated. And sometimes I found that actually in my own journey, hearing how other people have navigated things and like pulling different bits from different people together has been the best way that I've then found my own path. And I think that's the overarching message from the whole podcast, is that thing of like navigating, finding your identity, finding who you are, and then rocking that, and like creating your path and doing what works for you, and obviously not hurting anybody else in the process, but being authentic to yourself.
I love that so much, and I have one more question for you to close out this episode. Lots of young people want to create change and want to make a difference, but they may not know how to get started with that work. What advice do you have for those people who may be listening?
I think I would say the first thing I would say is, if someone wanting to make change, is that you don't need to look very far. The first thing you can do is actually the biggest one you can do, which is actually probably the hardest, is finding like your own self-acceptance and like part of yourself, and like loving aspects of yourself. And obviously like loving your whole self can be a very big, tricky thing, and I definitely completely get that. And then definitely that I'm still on my own journey with that. But I think the biggest change actually you can do to the world is actually by finding yourself. And like when you can be your true authentic self, you then have the capacity to inspire others to do the same. So I think that's something that's really kind of important. I guess also change can be so small. It can be as simple as very like tiny things within your community, whether it be, you know, even just like getting off a chair on the bus for somebody else. Like that maybe feels so small, but actually if we all do those tiny little things of kindness, they really do add up. nothing in when it comes to change is too small. But I guess if anyone at a tip, but like on a bigger level, work out what you're really passionate about if you want to like go even further in kind of the activism change journey. I think when it comes to making change, I think we can both agree that it's very tiring, and obviously it involves definitely need to look after yourself. But if it's got to be something that you're really authentically passionate about, because then it makes the kind of hard work worth it. And with that, whatever that might be, whether it be, for example, mental health, you look for mental health charities. You can then get involved with any of their, like nearly all of them have a little get involved tab. And that's how I started. Kind of for me, the idea of doing something myself would have not even been like, I didn't even realize that was a thing. But even if I had done that, would have been too scary. And there can like be smaller steps. But equally, if you're like, no, I want to go for it, go for it. There's so many different ways, but definitely organizations, the get involved tab is a great way to start.
I absolutely loved talking with Hannah, and I really think her story is just so inspiring. And, of course, I am so excited for you all to listen to Hannah's podcast, No Longer Legally Detained, tomorrow, December 5th, on Be the Change Media Network. Tune in for Hannah's Thursday Thoughts every Thursday, of course, and then Hannah will also be co-hosting Monday Mornings with Millie, alongside Millie Nicholson, on Mondays. So stay tuned for those episodes coming to Be the Change Media Network as well. If you enjoyed this episode and you want to hear more of Hannah's advice and her words of wisdom, tune in to both of these new shows coming to Be the Change Media Network. But in the meantime, I'll leave you with one last bit of Hannah's advice. Change comes when you love your whole self. Thank you so much for listening to this episode, and you can find Hannah on Instagram, and I included that link in the description of this episode. If you want to talk about anything I mentioned, please reach out to me by email at lily@bethechangepodcast.org or on Instagram at Be the Change Media Network. I am working on expanding Be the Change Media Network, which means bringing you more inspiring stories from amazing guests, like Hannah and Millie. If you enjoyed this episode, I would really appreciate it if you could leave the podcast a rating and a comment, because it will help these stories to reach, educate, and inspire more people. And I would love to hear your thoughts and feedback. Tune in for my next episode, but until then, be the change you wish to see in the world. Bye, guys.